The following is a conversation with Ruiz, an architect who writes, sketches, and teaches. He understands the city as a place to coexist and bring his sketchbook everywhere he goes to explore and understand the city. I invited you, Luis, because I admire the work that you do and the passion that you put into everything you do.
Hi, Nuno. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
I'd love to start the conversation by asking you what you try to convey with your work.
It's a good question because I wouldn't say that I try to convey anything in particular. It's more like a path to understand things, to see the world around me and understanding it. I am here with the Spanish poet Rafael Alberti, who wrote these beautiful lines and also accurate lines describing what is drawing. He wrote those lines, those ode to drawing, where he said that drawing is like dancing geometry, that things they missed out. So this is a beautiful metaphor that really expresses the feeling of drawing, because when you perceive things as blurry, if you draw them, they become crystal clear. So it's like a way of exploring. That's what really means to me.
If I'm not understanding wrong, this reminds me of that exercise that you try to do when you think that you understand something, and I believe there's a disconnect from the concept itself and the actual thing, understanding the actual thing. And this is an exercise that or an effort that you have to put. It might be that you're writing or you're sketching and you're trying to portray something. And into that process, you go from the loose idea that is in your mind about a building, a space, or a concept, and actually having to define it, to add detail, to be specific in a way that will help you explain it to others and also explain it to yourself.
Well, your question just has reminded me of this study that has been carried out in an American university, I cannot remember which one, that proves that students that take down their notes by handwriting are more successful in understanding things than those that type in their laptops. And apparently that's because you type faster, so you can take everything down, not missing a single word. If you write them down by hand, you are slower. But what apparently is a con and not a pro is better for understanding, because you have to process things. You have to understand them before taking down, because you have to select what you don't have to do if you type. So I think it has something to do also with the process of learning, of sketching, of drawing from reality, because you have to understand things before taking them down. Apparently, people tend to think, mainly people that don't draw, that it's like a very direct process. So you see things and your brain sends an order to your hand, and then you process things and you draw. But I think it's not the way things are really. It's how do you say the English word biunivoco? You start to make marks, and the hand goes forward, and the brain goes afterwards selecting the marks you have done. You select the good ones and you discard the bad ones. And so it's a way of going forth. It's a very interesting process. It's not so straight as we tend to think.
Yeah, I've done some work into trying to understand this process, and it seems it resembles a lot the way in which you do a sculpture, right? Like you have a rock and you don't have a way to know exactly how much you have to take out or how much you have to like make into the rock, right? So it's a process that after every stroke that you do, you have to reevaluate the process and then keep going. And when I look at sketches that have been done by me or by other people, mainly by me because it's the only way that I can think this way, is that I think I wouldn't be able to do that again now, right? Like sometimes I start sketching, I'm going to sketch this palm tree or something, and then I start adding detail to maybe the building behind it and the sky and other things. And it's a non-linear process, right? It's non-linear, and unless, I guess, you approach it in a super analytical way and try to look at it from a, like an abstract perspective and try to be really thoughtful of what you want to achieve, right? But at least for me, it's not the case. Many times I start adding detail that I didn't think of adding at the beginning or other sort of things. I don't know if this happens to you as well.
Yeah, I think non-linear is a very way of describing the process. Non-linear, yes. Jan Berger wrote that it's like digging a tunnel in search of the light. So you don't know how it's going to turn out at the end, but you go on forth. It's like a struggle. It's a good description, like a struggle.
Mm-hmm. And after, I've been writing and formally, I would say, like publishing on my, like self-publishing things online on blogs and websites. And I feel the process for some of those essays or some of those posts is really similar. Like sometimes you have a clear thought and you informally write as if you were writing an email to a friend, and you just send, you just press send, right? You write maybe 500 words and you press send, and that's what you publish. But other times, for me at least, I sketch out an idea, is really rough, and then I spend hours and hours or maybe days or even months sometimes playing with the idea and getting to an end result. And at least for me, I haven't been formally trained as a writer or as a journalist or something. This process makes me get to unexpected results as well. Like places to say, oh, this now looks a lot better, but it's impossible from a 500-word essay or a 1,000-word essay to know how much care was put into it. Like it might be from 10 minutes to 4 months, right? Like, and we don't really know. Mm-hmm. And I think the similar thing applies to sketching or any creative process that you follow.
Yes. I think it's this way of thinking the process. It's like a way you put at the beginning. You put a great effort. The word struggle I've just mentioned, and it's like a big void in front of you. It's a blank space, and you reflect. You make a reflection, and then suddenly everything makes sense. And it's more mechanical way. Things go smoother. So it's like you go into it at the beginning, and then at some point you receive back. So it's a good way of seeing that.
So I like the word mechanical, because I was looping back to what you said before. I think the student who's taking notes with typing on the computer, that's a mechanical process. Like words enter your brain, your hands are typing, you're connected into a process, and it doesn't require a lot of effort, as you said. Mm-hmm. So the other process, which is you're writing by hand, and there is an effort. There is like more like gasoline, right? Like every time you write, you're getting tired. Your hand is getting tired, and you have to measure how much effort you want to put and be more selective about the words. So I guess like that struggle of processing the words and selecting and then trying to summarize what is said, because you cannot type as fast, maybe write with your hand and typing. That process is what makes the effort allow you to remember things better, right? It's that struggle of... but yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to point out that mechanical thing that makes you forget about the process, like walking or running or something that doesn't require thinking. I think is what makes the disconnect from understanding instead of like something that lets you process more things. I had, in Spanish, this expression you mentioned to me the other day is que mucho abarca, poco aprieta, right? Like if you're like pushing into many areas at once, you can really push as hard as somebody else who's just pushing into one aspect of their professional career or creative field. And you were asking me, sometimes I wonder if I should give up on some of the things I'm doing. How do you manage, right, to be at first be content or be happy with the thought that you might not be progressing in one area as fast as you may in another because you're pushing too many things at once? And how do you manage to live with all these different disciplines? And I remember you also meant like they all feed into each other, and that's something that you see as a positive thing.
Yes, that's the magic that happens. Then when that occurs when things that apparently are not connected suddenly show a link between perhaps writing and reading and sketching. It's like Nuccio Ordine wrote, the usefulness of the useless. So you have like a background with images, with texts that apparently are not related to each other, but suddenly there's like a spark and you connect things. So it's very enriching when you are not only focused on one task, and you apparently it's like a waste of effort, but at the end I think it's really worth the effort.
And so what would be some of those things that you connect from one field to the other? And how do you define where the facet of a sketcher starts and the one of writer ends, or as a teacher?
For example, I'm going to take into account something I read from a book written by Stephen Jay Gould, the paleontologist. It's apparently an article about some fossils detected in a forgotten place in British Columbia in Canada. It's very old, very ancient fossils that were detected because of a flood. So the way the first paleontologist that studied it, his background made him see what he was expecting to see. But they were not what he understood or described the first time. Why I'm saying this? Because apparently the way I study the old drawings of cities, it's a very similar process. And suddenly it made sense. I found a connection. It was a scientific writing that I was reading for fun, and I found this connection between what paleontologists study in these strange animals that were found in the rock, and the hints you see in the old drawings of cities. So it's that kind of way of seeing things that I was mentioning before. It's connections you find among things.
I might be wrong, but I think what you're referring to is something that I read about on Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. So this is he's a psychologist who got a Nobel Prize in economics. And he mentions this term that is called cognitive bias, I think. Availability bias, right? Uh-huh. And availability bias means that you're always, or your mind is always going to be triggered by the things that are available to it, right? So if you're trained as an architect and you look at drawings or even like some other concept, you're always going to look at it from that perspective. And let's say that, if you've been studying columns or designs or things like this, the first time you look at another drawing might be from a car or something. It's, your brain is going to fire up that knowledge. Oh, these vertical bars look like columns to me or something. So that I guess that acquiring knowledge from many different areas gives you a completely different perspective, and your mind, the possibility of connecting into different points of it when you see new things, right? So that's why I believe these things happen. It happens to me all the time. Like, I just told you before the interview, when I was coming here, I looked at the label on a bus that was your street. Yes. And I would have never probably paid attention to that if I wasn't coming to have a talk with you, right? And so I really like how those random connections happen. But in some way, I want to specify that they're not random. They are because of, the things we consume, the things we've watched, the things we study. And maybe just to know if you do this, these serendipitous encounters can just happen, but do you make any effort into going to any events or reading anything specific or consuming any media sources that might improve or enhance this capability of relating different fields?
Yes. I think the more open you are, the cleaner is your sight, your view, makes things discover unexpected paths. So apparently the first paleontologist, if you let me go back again to the same case, he didn't believe in evolution. So he saw what he could fit in his previous scheme of things. So it's obvious, it's good if you have the wider background as possible, but you have also to be open to new things. So I think it's a balance between the both that makes things more productive.
Can you comment on one of the projects that you've enjoyed the most?
Perhaps those that are when you have previous conditions that are very tight. This precise restriction makes you think of in more creative way. I made this project. It's not a big project. It's an architectural project. In an existing old building, an old house. It was a two-house dwelling, and it was a listed building and a small plot. So I had to work with the dreams of the future dwellers that had some ideas, and so it was a good way of not having complete freedom, but some strong conditions and requirements before that made you develop a new and more creative design, let's say.
Yeah, we had in this podcast, we have Panagiotis Michalatos, which was my master's thesis advisor. He's a Greek architect as well, but trained later as a computational designer and programmer. And he's a huge advocate of design constraints as enhancers of creativity, or like something that helps you push the limits in a specific way. Like having too much freedom in some way blocks us, right? From we have too many axes in which, or directions in which we can go, so we get blocked. But if you focus just into exploding one maybe one stylistic language or like one system, it really helps to move forward a lot better and generate better designs. I wanted to know also if you even thought of where you're today, or if you've had ever imagined where would you be, or where you would be today when you were studying architecture.
It's in some sense, it's like going back to the beginning, because when I started to study architecture, I was thinking of productive terms, of useful future developments of my career. And some of the things I left aside like writing, studying, researching. Now I'm going back into them again. So I don't know if it's an answer to your question.
Yeah, you now formally have the title of an architect, right? Like of you're an architect, and you even have a doctorate, and you're starting now to teach at university. And I believe you've done that before. How do you go about defining yourself as a writer, as a book publisher, as a sketcher, right? I feel that those are things that we need social approval from the city or from like other professionals to get to write down. That you can say I'm an architect because I'm certified, and maybe a writer because I'm publishing on the newspaper. You can talk more about that. But yeah, how do you go about defining yourself as the things that you just learned by hard work and effort?
I'm grateful to the School of Architecture for the site that has given me, because some people compare between engineers and architects, saying that an engineer is someone who makes a very deep view into a very particular thing. And architects are those people that have a wider interests, but not so deep. So this combination between the humanistic approach, rooted in culture and history, and also a very technical, you say?
Technical
understanding of things. It's a very balanced way of both things that has helped me a lot in the way of writing. I don't particularly like the word artistic, but it might be the case.
I have a quote here from what you said on previous conversations to me, and it says, more than an artist, I think I'm, more than an artist that does beautiful things, I think I'm someone who thinks about what is done.
Yes, because I'm not, when I'm producing an image, I'm not thinking in the beauty of the result. I am interested in the process. I am interested in the development of things and the way it makes me things crystal clear, as I said before.
One thing that I also wanted to talk about is that I got to meet you when I went sketching with this local urban sketchers group in Malaga, right? So I would like to talk a bit about how you started writing, so how you started drawing, how you started sketching, and how you brought this group of sketches to Malaga. First, maybe we step back. Maybe you can introduce our audience to what urban sketching is and what the Urban Sketchers group is.
Well, urban sketching is literally draw the city in a direct approach, sketching on site. But it also is a noun that describes a group that is settled worldwide, that was born in the United States by a Spanish journalist that started to combine text and drawing. It was using the drawings in a narrative way. So perhaps it has to do with his job as a journalist, but apparently what has always existed, which is sketching reality, but like a part of a process, perhaps to produce a painting afterwards. And these drawings that were made in the process were always kept like in a drawer or something. And apparently now they become like a target in itself. So not only targeting yourself, but also that due to social media, become like a phenomenon. So it's a collective, really. It's a community. A community is it's perhaps the word. That is really enriching because you see the different approach that are made by people from different backgrounds and from different countries. Because you know that, for example, architects draw in getting attention, paying attention to very particular things like proportion and perspective. Watercolorists also have a very specific approach of blending colors, complementary colors, perhaps not paying so much attention to line. So when you mix all these different way of seeing things together, the result is really enriching. Mm-hmm.
So I believe the person you mentioned before is Gaby Campanario?
Gaby Campanario, sorry, I didn't say name. Yes, of course.
Yeah,
it's
and he's
Gaby Campanario.
In Washington? Or where do you know where he lives? I don't remember.
I think it's in Washington, yeah, in Seattle.
Oh, Seattle. Yeah,
Seattle.
Okay, in Seattle. So yeah. He does have a blog online. I've visited, but I've never met him in person. So how did you get introduced to this group, and what people you got to know to then go and decide to form a group here in your hometown in Malaga?
Yeah, sorry, I've just noticed that I didn't answer to your question really. Well, I was teaching at the university like 12 years ago, and I was a teacher of garden and landscaping. So I was searching and making a search in the internet regarding architectural drawing, the tag architectural drawing. And suddenly I found like a whole world of images, wonderful images that were something surprising and new for me.
What year was this?
Pardon?
What year?
I think it was 2009. Yes, 2009, 12 years ago. And I discovered specifically drawings by two architects, Gerard Michel from Belgium and Florian Hasselbach from Germany, that both belonged to this community that had been settled on the Flickr. And I started to interact with them to make comments and receive comments, and also I started to post my own sketches. But it was all an online approach and an online relationship. And at some point, I thought that perhaps there were more people in a big city like Malaga that might have the same interest. And I found another person that also belonged to the urban sketcher community. She was Cristina Urdiales, which is an engineer herself. So we started to make comments to each other, and at some point we decided to meet and perhaps to settle a meeting and to invite anyone who was interested, who might be interested. And then it was like the seed of the group.
Yeah, and I personally remember going to a meeting on 2010 in Gibralfaro's castle. And I don't know if that was the first time I went, and I think I met you and other of the people that belong to the collective or the group here. But yeah, that was also time of my introduction to this sort of drawing. I think it happened at the same time while I was starting to study architecture, and one of our teachers was encouraging us to go every weekend, walking in the streets and sketch different spots throughout the city, in situ in the place. And just to clarify, in case that's not super clear for people who are not familiar with urban sketching, there is kind of this, there is the Urban Sketcher Manifesto, which is online, and talks about the characteristic of an urban sketch to be done on site, as you're looking at reality and not doing it from a picture. But in your own kind of creative endeavors, you can draw from pictures and nobody's going to judge you for it. But the urban sketcher community pays a lot of attention and doing things in the place.
Yes, and for me it's an invaluable approach, because when you see things through a picture, when you draw from a photograph, you are missing a lot in the process, because it has already been selected. You are not submerged in the three-dimensional world. You are already seeing things through a window, which is the rectangular sheet of paper, which is the photograph. When you are in the real world, you are in the three-dimensional space, so you have no limits. So perhaps you're not perceiving all the things with the same intensity. You are paying attention to what's in your focus, but you see like a peripheral view of things that are not of your main attention. But perhaps when the secret is time. I think time is the word, because people also tend to compare a drawing with a photograph. It's like a frozen piece of reality. And it's not, because while you're sketching, perhaps you are investing an hour of your life, half an hour of your life, depending on how fast you are, and things change a lot. Not only perhaps because of the movement of things, but also because you're perceiving sounds, smells, things that are not directly related to your sight, but that at the end make the experience as a whole. So that's a really valuable thing.
What would be some of the specific things that you would do differently if you're sketching a building on the street, or if you're sketching it from a photo at home?
Well, it depends on the purpose of the drawing you are making. Perhaps if you are making an analytical description of the building, it's different. You are just focusing on proportion, on perspective, but if you are perceiving it in a more open way, just to understand, like to see it, you see more things. You see how people interact with the place, how shades change. So it's much more enriching.
And I think one thing that is also fascinating is that many times we go to these meetings, which because of the pandemic and stuff have been a bit halted, and have been postponed to get back at it, and we will be slowly getting back at them. The cool thing is maybe 20 or 30 people go, if there's an event that many people go, and then you see all the sketchbooks and you see all these different ways that people have to look at the same thing. So right, it's the very same building, the very same space, the very same like, I don't know, square or river or something, and how different the interpretations of each individual are.
Definitely. And it's not also, as we have said many times, it's not also the beauty or the perfection of the drawings, because some of the perfect drawings are soulless. And you see people that are perhaps not so skillful in sketching, but have a very powerful way of relating things, of explaining things, of a very sharp eye into reality. So it's also a very interesting point regarding perhaps your background and your studies and your age, even your age.
One thing I wanted to ask also, when did you start drawing and when did you start sketching? Because, we all draw when we're young. Then in architecture, you get taught like a way of drawing that is an architectural way. And then later there is that sketching facet that is also architectural, but it's different. It's looser, as you said. Like it's a loose or wiggly line. It doesn't need to be perfect. It's more the sketch than the final drawing.
In my particular case, I have always drawn since I was a child, but I was not particularly keen on sketching from reality. I just invented things from my mind. And in my first year of studies, I was encouraged by my teachers to go outside and sketching, not also the buildings that you had in the street, making just a separate sheet, but also to keep it like a journal, to keep a sketchbook in which not every single drawing was there, but the whole collection of drawings have a higher value than the sum of each of them, because it was like testimonial.
Like capturing like a journaling or keeping a log, right?
Yeah, keeping a record.
Okay.
Keeping a record of a process, of a search. So it's the way.
Yeah, the thing that you mentioned resembles a bit. I mean, this is taking a record of, keeping record of everything you've done. There is also this phenomenon that's called the cheerleader effect or something. It's like, the cheerleaders.
Cheerleader effect.
Animadora, right?
Yes.
So it's when you see an individual, like this is for people, right? When you see an individual person, they might not appeal as like pretty or handsome, but when you see like a group of people in turn, because they're all different and stuff, each of them individually look prettier or more handsome being in a group, right? So there is this thing that is appealing from seeing the sketchbook with all these neighboring sketches on the page, right? And it makes it more appealing than maybe even sketch individually. So it's, that's an effect that I'm mindful of. And it's what happens when you see like pictures on Instagram, for instance, like a lot of sketches in a page, and it's like all the little labels and all these things. So it's that, every individual piece appeals more to the viewer because of that composition or that the group that accompanies it.
Cheerleader effect. I've never heard that. I will definitely take it down. Let me say, I also appreciate sketchbooks that make it impossible to take sheets out. So you keep also your failures, not only your successes. And although it's a bit annoying at the beginning, at the end, with time, you tend to appreciate and to learn from your mistakes.
That we cannot keep forgetting about these things, but of course I started sketching with pencil, then pen, then erasing the pencil, and then watercolor, things like this. And then at some point I gave up on like the pencil. I believe like mainly you too, like unless you're doing some composition at the beginning that you want to make sure that this sketch is fitting in this space. So you start like being more comfortable with that. Like say, this is my sketchbook, but it doesn't need to be perfect. And with that relief of stress that that it doesn't have to be perfect, you're just going to put everything you do in there. I think there is something to it. There is something to it where you know that you're allowed to make mistakes in this sketchbook.
Yes. And there's also a thing that I value a lot, which is perhaps when you are sketching in this way, directly without previous pencil, you are missing precision, you're missing perfection, but you're gaining authenticity, and it's more sincere result. So you can overwork things, finish things, overworking them, but the more I draw, the more I tend to value to draw less and to consider important what you do not draw more than what you draw.
Can you talk a bit more about this practice that you do, and I mean, as I do as well, and many other people that you do into carrying a sketchbook with you and capturing improvised moments?
Well, it has become my invaluable friend, my best friend, my little sketchbook that I always bring with me every day on a regular basis. And perhaps I just keep it in my pocket all day and never take it out, or perhaps I have the opportunity to take it out and to make observations and to find moments to sketch and to observe. It's a very useful eye gymnastics. Not also eye, because it's a brain process. I think the eye is only the excuse. It's a way of understanding things, as I said at the beginning.
Yeah, many times when I'm going out and I come back home and I've been bringing my backpack or something, I have this expression that is taking the backpack or taking the sketchbook for a walk, which means, I took it just in case, but that day I didn't get to sketch. So this happens all the time because you want to make sure that you have it just in case you find those like dead minutes or maybe that hour or something where you have an opportunity to portray something or capture something in that improvised way. And it doesn't, the effort to bring it, even if you're not going to sketch, is not as bad as the feeling that you get is like, I'm here in this train stuck for 3 hours and I could have like sketched this figure that is here, or these people that are in front of me.
Yeah, it's really frustrating when you find the moment or the opportunity to make a sketch and you don't have the sketchbook with you. It's really frustrating. I think the secret is to make to give way to the opportunities. So instead, for example, of driving to some place, take the public transport. It's a very healthy thing for your mind, because it makes you aware of what is surrounding you, the people, the real people, people who wouldn't coincide with you if you didn't walk or take the bus or the train.
I believe that now you're really comfortable like sketching anywhere and like standing on the street or sitting at a bar or any place. But this hasn't always been like this. Like some people feel that, the traits that you get as an experienced sketcher or something as something that you always had. So for maybe young people or people who are getting started, what would you recommend? And can you comment a bit on like the first time you went sketching? How did you feel?
Yes, when I was at the university, we were to gather in groups. So it was, you felt more protected because you were not alone. So you were with your mates from the school. And also when you were traveling and you just bring your sketchbook with you in a different place, you don't know anyone. But it's different the first time you go out in your own city and you stand in a public place where you can be recognized by someone. So the first day is a bit embarrassing, but just the first day. The second day you are not aware. You just relax and you are focused on your task, and you forget. It's like a Zen exercise, a way of meditation. So you just don't bother if somebody sees you. On the other hand, people tend to be very respectful and friendly. So it makes no sense to be embarrassed by that.
Yeah, and people who pay attention are maybe usually people who like also drawing or would like to do it or appreciate what you're doing. Where was the first place that you went sketching? I believe you told me 12 years ago.
I think the first time I went in my own city to sketch, it was Plaza de la Marina, which is a very busy place where perhaps half of the inhabitants of the city drive through. So it's a big possibility that you are being sighted.
And Do you have any place in mind that you would go if you could catch a flight now and go sketching?
Well, I tend to prefer not very big cities, just middle-sized cities, which are not specifically touristic. And they don't have to be very beautiful. They just must provide a nice setting, but with plenty of life. It's like a way of authenticity, I would say. It's a word. On the other side, there's a place I would definitely love to know, which is Iran, which is a place that I find very appealing because of the history and the art. So perhaps, I would definitely go to Isfahan.
I would love to learn about the city through your sketches when you do. Who has been somebody that you consider or you would consider influential on the way that you sketch?
On the way that I sketch, for the way I draw, which is making marks and like not a very direct way of like making different proofs and refining the result. I like a lot the work of the German engravers, because the way they put the marks, it's I love this way which is very expressive, and the same way is very precise and complex. But at the end, it looks simple. So I like when things don't look complicated, even though they might be, but they look simple.
Yeah, I tend to look at this type of drawings also, like etchings and engravings, and it's weird because you can't, it seems like really careful, and you can look with like a magnifier and like see through each stroke. But if you try to mimic that carefully, it doesn't look the same. The strokes need to be really fast, really concise, and it seems, at least to me, that that's obtained through like years and years of practice of the technique. And I always think if these engravings got to our days, they probably were some of the best ones, right? There might be a lot of other people who made other engravings, let's say, not worth of sharing with the world or something like that. So the technique, let's say, looks really simple, as you said, but if you try to do it, it requires a lot of training and a lot of practice. In general, if you look at in your entire career, are there any other people who are influential that you look up as a reference or that left a mark on you, not necessarily for sketching, but for like writing, architecture, like the way you understand the world?
Well, I really cherish the times at the university, because there was times of endless conversations with your friends in your apartment when you were you had no particular timetable apart from the lectures. So the way you talked freely, you started to define your way of thinking of things and confronting it to others with similar interest to your ones. They were very productive because it was endless time. You could be hours talking, and they were definitely like a highlight for my way of thinking.
Would you highlight one specific aspect of sketching that you really enjoy?
And I will go again to Rafael Alberti, which is the dancing of the pen. The pen dancing on the paper, just like when you make a calligraphy, you just don't think you're going to write an A or a B or a C. You just leave it loose, and sketching in that way is so free for me that I really appreciate it.
I might be wrong, but isn't this also a way of carrying a sketchbook with you the way that Leonardo da Vinci, for example, understood it to learn about things and sketch things on the city?
Yes. In particular, I think of anatomic drawings. So it's a fantastic way of understanding and also expressing and presenting it to others. Also, Albrecht Dürer, the focus on very simple things like the herbs in the field or little animals. So even the not very striking aspects of reality are worth a look, and it might be surprising for you.
You also mentioned that you have a defect, that is that you try to think things through too much before you release them or publish them or things like this, and that this in some way freezes you, right? What do you think about this? Do you see the work in progress is something that you don't want to show the world, or are you trying to work on this? Is this something that has always happened?
I don't know if there's also the Spanish saying in English, which is the best is not always the good, which is I perhaps tend to think that things are not mature enough. So perhaps I want to make a second thing. It's like a contradiction with the spontaneous approach I really appreciate. I know it's a contradiction, but yes, sometimes I tend to think, oh, perhaps it's not mature yet. It happens also with writing more than with sketching. Perhaps I feel more comfortable or more confident. I think it's confident word with sketching than with writing. It's a way of...
And maybe you yourself and other people who see your drawings are more forgiving with the imperfections on the drawing that the imperfections in writing. We're used to reading from newspapers or books or things that have gone through series of editors sometimes, or at least for yourself, you can retype something, but it would make no sense for an urban sketch to be redone over and over until it's perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So seeing a typo that it's something that kind of hurts your eyes, but seeing like a wiggly line or something that is not perfect might not be. Yeah, I think they're two different mediums. It's really hard, mm-hmm. and I think I can relate to that. One thing that you mentioned as well to me is deadlines, right? For example, for those of you who don't know this, Luis publishes a weekly column at the local newspaper, Diario Sur, and I believe at La Opinión, I don't know if you're still doing that one.
I've been doing it for 7 years, and like a month ago, I definitely quit it.
Okay, so he's been doing this, and I believe it was a weekly thing. How did having a tight deadline change your process? Because at least for me, if you're just to publish a post or like some written text, if it's open-ended, it can be, as I mentioned before, years until I get it to something I want to publish, and I might leave it aside for many months. How do deadlines change the way that you look at this process and the publication process and your creative process?
Yeah, I think you understand also because you are also a creator. And for me, it's been a very useful exercise and gymnastics because it's not also it is not only the deadline, but also to the extent. You have to be very tight to these 24 lines. You cannot make 23 or 25. You have 24 lines, and to finish it the Friday at noon. So it's a way of not dispersing your efforts and to be concise.
And I think regarding that, in some way, sometimes you might say, this text needs to be like 3 lines longer, but I cannot make it, or I wish I had one more month. But at the same time, that deadline, that limitation makes you more capable of creating, because okay, I've complied with the line length, so I know this is okay, at least in the format, and I have to submit this no matter what. So it could be better. I could spend years working on it, but I have to take it out the door. I always remember the words of Seth Godin. This is like an American writer. He's got like 25 books or something. And he talks mainly about marketing, but he also talks a lot about the creative process and how if you publish recurrently, like every day he publishes a blog post, for instance, you do one weekly. I'm starting to publish also weekly. You start taking giving less importance to each individual artifact that you produce, like each text, each sketch, and each class that you give. As you repeat this process over and over again, it's more, as you mentioned, about the sketchbook itself and not the individual contribution of one drawing, and about your overall contribution throughout the years to the newspaper, and not the individual essay that you're going to submit this Friday at noon.
Yeah, it's also interesting when you have different registers, because I produce my weekly article, my weekly opinion column, but I also write research article for scientific magazines, my scientific journals. So they're very different, the way you have to approach each of them. I particularly tend to be poetic, because I think the power of the myth and the symbols, when you are explaining things or you are relating something, when you put a metaphor in your text, I think it's really powerful and useful. But that's something you cannot do that much in research texts. So you have to be precise, you have to be concise, you cannot make long sentences. So it's good to change suddenly from one text to the other gender. So it's good, yes.
You've mentioned to me that you need to be able to jump between these different registers. You mentioned the academic, the poetic, the opinion one, and mentioned that like in academic style everything's a bit clearer, it's a bit easier. In poetic style and opinion, it's a bit harder, and that your best point of reference was that you're a good reader.
Yes, and I try not to read always in the same kind of books. I enjoy a lot and find very interesting for me scientific divulgation. I like also poetry, classic poetry and classics and novels. Everything is, I think the blending of all those together is the most satisfactory way of reading.
Can you talk about your writing process? Is there anything special about it, or any series of steps that you follow to do it?
I always like to start with citations of other authors that make me build some reasoning. That's the way. I also, when I am writing like an opinion column for a newspaper, ironics is always respectful, but ironics is also a good point. Not to make everything harder, but so introducing a bit of humor is the way of softening things, not to be aggressive.
Yeah, and one thing I'm curious about, we talked about this before in the terms of sketching and writing, but is your process linear, or how do you allocate what publication you want to do for this Friday as opposed to next week or the other? Do you have a repository of ideas that you build on top of, or is it perfectly scheduled?
In some sense, I tend to think that I'm always writing the same thing. For at least it's something I perceive. People that read me say it's not the point. It's not always the same at all. But you tend to think that you repeat the same ideas. When I'm writing something, I like to put the strong ideas, like 3 strong ideas, and then blend them, making connections between them. So it's not trying not to make a sharp cut between them.
Is there a moment, for instance, where you have a draft, so an idea that you're working on, and you say, okay, this is harder, I require more time for this, I'm going to leave this aside, so I'm going to write on something completely new from scratch for this week, I'll submit it, and then I'll focus on that other idea for a different week? Do you have the time and the option to do that?
Yeah, it depends on sometimes you are reaching dangerously the Friday, and then you suddenly realize that you have no ideas. Other times the reality, perhaps the news, help you a lot because there's some big issue that is going on, mainly on urbanism or urban planning. That is my field of interest. But sometimes you become poetic when you are 7 years writing weekly. Perhaps there's some point that you write about memories, about time. I think time is a subject that is always floating around me. Memories, the meaning of life, perhaps. So things like that. If you let me to answer in a more accurate way, I think my background as an architect helps me a lot because I perceive things, even when you're writing a text, in a modular way, and to structure, to build things with a structure, and not just with a flow. More, structure is important, even if it's subtle and it's not directly perceived.
According to what you said before, that you feel that you're writing all the time about the same thing, I had the same feeling. I've heard other writers talk about the very same thing, and I read this book, or I remember this quote from John Maeda. He's a researcher at MIT and a big creative, and it says repetition. It works. And the meaning behind it is that we think that we're repeating things, and probably we are, but that works because people don't understand them at first. And even if they're listening to you, the fact that you're repeating something over and over and over is going to let them process or digest those ideas better. And then the second part of this is that we tend to think that everyone's listening all the time. So if we say, let's talk about time today, let's talk about time tomorrow, they're going to be bored. But there are different nuances that we introduce every time we talk about the same thing. And also that it might be the first time that somebody reads something that you've done, or it might be somebody who's been disconnected from your writing for months, and then suddenly they find that text. So I feel that we can always bring this opportunity to people to read about the very same thing that we wrote a year ago. And it's unlikely that everyone is going to make that connection of, oh, it's talking about the very same thing, or I already know about this. So I don't know. I like to think that way because it's true that there is always this thread of topics that we tend to repeat over and over. And that's who we are, and that's what we are interested in. So
yeah, and it's true too that perhaps you're saying the same thing but in a different way. You're expressing in a more informal way, because it's also true that people tend to perceive things according to their own schemes. So they tend, like when we were talking about the fossils and the interpretation of fossils, that people tend to read not what you're saying, but what they are expecting you to say. So if you turn the things in a different way and present them with another aspect, it's a good way of making a better connection between you and the reader.
I also have I don't know, for instance, like a short publication that talks about time, and somebody might tell you, oh, I really like this little essay or this little story where you were talking about your watch or about the Egyptians or something. And I don't remember. I say, which one are you referring to? And then I think, oh, I was actually writing about time. I wasn't, there is like a different way of seeing. So the reader has to interpret, and they many times focus on aspects of the writing that you didn't think were that important or would be what sticks on the. And I guess that's also something that comes with being a more experienced writing, that you can imagine farther what will stay on the mind of the reader. Right?
Yeah, even articles that you think that they didn't result particularly successful. You didn't quite express all the things you wanted to express, and you tend to be not really orgulloso, proud of what you wrote, but people really liked them and they find it appealing. So it's like a mystery.
It's similar to what happens with what's called search engine optimization, where you're trying to make something so people get to it by typing things on Google. And it's really random. Like many times you write about something that is super meaningless, took you 2 minutes, and then you start getting like thousands of visits because everyone now has that question and is looking for that. And then maybe you put years into writing a piece of text and then nobody enters, right? It's like about attention and what people are like called by, right? One thing that I wanted to also ask you is about publication, right? How did you get to publish your first book? Is it easier now? Was the process really hard? Or yeah, how did that happen?
Well, my first book was really more than an accident because it was not done on purpose. The thing is, my wife encouraged me to publish my collection of drawings. I had a big collection of drawings that, as I said before, they were in a sketchbook, so they were an organized collection of drawings. So she said, why don't you publish them? I said, well, it's my drawings. But apparently more people asked for that in the internet. I had some suggestions. So I said, okay, let's try to find a publisher, which was not easy because it was like a very local product. It was my sketches of my own city. So the variety of publishers present in Malaga was not that wide. So I had the doubt of who would understand these kind of things that had not been already done here. And I found this wonderful publisher that was focused on books for children. So he really understood because he's a graphic designer himself. So he was understanding the visual very well. So it was, as I said, it was very authentic because they were a collection of drawings done without the purpose of being published. So it was like making them organized in a way that made some narrative sense. And for my surprise and for the publisher's surprise, it was really successful. We have already 5 editions already. And it's still selling well from 2014 that came the first edition.
Is this Loving Book or what?
Loving Books, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Loving Books is the name of the publisher,
yeah,
right?
The publisher, Alejandro Villén and Maria Corredera, which are the two names after Loving Books, which is the brand.
Yeah, and I love some of the publications, yours and from some other people that I've seen that they've published. They're really nice. How does exhibiting your work, selling your work, you might be selling some sketches, exhibiting your sketches, also selling books that feature your work. How does that feel?
It's at the end it's a bit strange because as you asked the first thing you asked was what are you trying to convey, and I'm not really trying to convey, so it's also a bit embarrassing because even though you think that you are not expressing much about yourself, you are telling a lot about you and the things that are important to you. So yeah, it's like a bit feeling naked.
One of the things that Yuval Noah Harari, there's the writer of *Sapiens*, this book that it's like a non-fiction like essays.
Yes.
And one of the things that he mentions that the main difference from humans to other species is that we like to gossip, right? We like to talk about things that are meaningless in some way and that have to do with mundane things that happen to us and mainly to our colleagues or to our friends or to our community. And in some way, I think what attracts readers and the audience and other people around the world is that hope that you will get to know something special about the person who's conveying those things. So when pieces are, sometimes is, there is this thing where some people that teach how to write and things say to you, not everything that has happened to you in your life is something that people are going to care about, right? So that's something that when you start writing personal things, we tend to think, oh, let's describe everything, right? It's not about that. But I do think that there is a lot of power, and I try to do that in my own work, with presenting yourself in an authentic way and being open that, we're human. we're not robots, and we don't have to appear as perfect beings. And I think that happens a lot. That's kind of the concept of wabi-sabi. I don't know if you know that. Is like kind of the concept of being comfortable with things that are imperfect. And that takes, at least to me, that's a process that took like almost, I would say, 8 or 10 years to get to. That is being content with putting things out there that people might judge because they're not perfect, they're not finished, and that your way of thinking will change over time, right? So it's an opening process, but also about saying, this is what I do, this is what I'm trying to learn and what I'm trying to do, and this is all my process. So I think there is a lot to that, and people can definitely appreciate that process.
Yeah, I think I'm not really trying to teach something. It's just I'm expressing ideas in a very humble way. So I remember having an argument in the internet with someone who said, because you, the architects, have to, and I'm not talking in behalf of the architects. I'm just expressing my own ideas, and I might be wrong. I'm probably wrong in many ways. But I think the enriching thing is when you vibrate in the same way of other ones. When you read something that perhaps has not been for you, but even if you read, for example, the Quixote, and the fragility of the Quixote, you feel it in your own way, your ideals, perhaps outdated, and that kind of vibration you feel with the one who wrote it. It's very appealing, and I think it's the secret of communication.
And do you have in mind the publication of yours, like book or blog post that has been the most successful, that has touched the most people, or that people have congratulated you the most, or that has sold the most copies?
Well, this book about, because it's also a kind of biographical approach to my city, which is the Málaga Cuaderno de Viaje, Málaga sketchbook, published by Loving Books. As it is a very personal way of perceiving my city, many people feel recognized in it. So I think it's the secret of why it's being so widely distributed. Also, another articles, opinion columns I have written about the city, how not in a nostalgic way, because it can be also confused with nostalgia, but articles that I have dedicated to the city as a harmonious place for living, where you can be in touch with others, are also very widely appreciated by readers.
Tying back to, tying into this publication realm of yours, of like putting things out there for people to read, to see, to watch, I would ask you, how does it feel to have a new website?
Oh, well, as you know, and we have already discussed, I have many interests, and my presence in the internet was very chaotic. So, because you are the person who designed and developed the website, I feel very proud of how you did it, because it's the way I appreciate things, also in architecture. Things that appear to be very clean, very simple, although had a lot of work of organization and complexity that is not obvious. So I'm really happy to have my drawings, my scientific production, my books, my journalist work together.
What's changed after you have been in some way enabled to publish in a different form? Have you found yourself, I don't know, like maybe crafting your content online in a different way, or sharing it with peers in a different way?
Well, the most obvious is that some people know me because of my drawings. Some people know me because of my presence in the newspapers. Some people know my academic research. So having all in the same place make clearer what my profile is. So I'm not also a person who makes drawings or who writes.
It's hard to describe oneself when you do many things, right? If it's not just Luis Ruiz the architect, it's like a lot of other stuff that is. You needed a bio. You needed like a one-page biography to explain what are your interests and the things that you do.
Yeah, perhaps you remember that my last thing to be ready for the website was the presentation page, where you define yourself. Everything. It's apparently the easiest thing, because we just put down what you are. But that's not so easy.
So that's what's interesting about that is that we had, again, talking about constraints, we had like an open-ended biography page. So for those of you who are listening or are watching, I would say you can go to the website at luisruiz.es. That's a Spanish domain name. So luisruiz.es. I believe you can also just Google Ruiz Padrón or Luis Ruiz. Uh-huh. And what was interesting is that we had this open-ended biography page in the about page, and you didn't really have any constraints. You can add as much as you want there. But then we said, okay, now we need a summary of this. We need something to put like a headline with 1, 2, or 3 sentences on the main page that people will be willing to write, because when you see a bio that is long, some people just skim through it, and that summarizes all the things that you do, which is hard. And this is also on the website. This is something that is ever changing, because as year pass, you might start doing new things, or you might stop doing certain things. And this is something I've seen myself and other people. The bio is some of the things that changes the most, because you think you're like a designer who writes, but then 3 years later you're a podcaster or a publisher, or you've started teaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there is that kind of dynamic nature of describing oneself, and it is more apparent when you have to put it in words, right? When you're asked,
Mm-hmm.
okay, now you have a website, you have to put that headline there. Who are you?
Mm-hmm.
How can we? I introduced you at the beginning. Can we do this exercise where you try, like, maybe to summarize who you are to the audience?
There's a Spanish saying that is hombre orquesta. I don't know if you have that word in English. That is someone who plays a lot of instruments himself. So you have many phases. But I define myself as an architect not only because it's it's the title I was given at the university, but because it's also the way of I see things and organize my mind. So perhaps the words you used are the most accurate. An architect who teaches, who writes, and who sketches, and also, of course, construct buildings.
Okay, before we move in to something that is a bit more about life in general, and we start wrapping up, I would love to, I already mentioned your website, so luisruiz.es. Where else would you point people if they want to see more of your work?
If they go to the website, which I am very grateful again, because I'm very satisfied with it. There you have the different paths to go to the different, the Twitter, where I publish some opinions, the Facebook, which is more a general approach, and the Instagram, where are my images.
Yeah, and Luis also has some links to the newspaper publications or that they can see, and then they can get linked to there. And actually, we'll add notes to the show notes of this podcast as well, with some of these links. As a follow-up to this, I would like to know, when did you start teaching, right? This is something that you've been learning a lot, studied architecture or sketching, writing. Why did you start teaching?
Well, teaching is a way of learning for me, because apparently you are the one who is teaching, but it's you who is learning. For me, it's a really productive way of learning. To be precise, it was 2004 which I started to teach landscaping and gardening in the private school of architecture in Malaga. I was there for 7 years, I think. Then I focused on other things. So I was not like a full-time teacher, just giving lectures and conferences. Now I'm back at the university 10 years later, teaching at the School of Architecture, the subject of architectural graphic expression, and the touch with students, the way you see their curiosity is something that has no price for me. It's when I have spent 4 hours all through the afternoon and we finish, and the feeling I have is like I'm like floating in the air.
The one thing that we haven't talked about is that throughout this worldwide organization of urban sketches, Luis also teaches workshops that have to do with sketching, and you go to maybe giving some lectures, some conferences. I wanted to ask you, what is the hardest, or what are the hardest things that maybe your students or your workshop attendees have to learn or struggle to understand?
Again, it's to be relieved from what you see with your mind, not trusting your eyes. What I say to people is trust your eyes and not what you have in mind. Be free and have a clean look into things, so that they don't condition your sight, your perception of things.
And is there any advice that you would like to give young people, or just people who are trying to learn how to write, sketch, or teach, or any of the things you do?
Don't be afraid of making mistakes, because making mistakes is the way of learning. If you don't make mistakes, you don't learn. So that's in short, that's my main advice.
What would be some of the maybe biggest mistakes that you've learned from?
Overdoing things, not trusting my eyes, as I said, and not mainly with writing, not expressing the things in the more direct. Trying to be baroque, it's a mistake.
Being more straightforward, right? Something that you could maybe tell people to do, right? Try to use simple words and something that is clear.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've reached, we've talked about a lot of your creative endeavors. I was inherently attracted and interested by the way that you teach, you sketch, you write and publish your contents. I would like to now move into something that has to do more with like, how does Ruiz understand life as a whole? And the first question from me is, do you consider your life simple?
I try every day to make it simpler. I borrow from you, getting simple as a motto in my life. Yeah, definitely. And the more time passes, the more clear I see things in that sense.
And can you think of one thing that would make your life slightly easier?
Not trying to satisfy others, to keep to someone's opinion of you, what they expect from you, but just to be honest with yourself and with the others. Because being honest with you is being honest with the others.
Following up on this that you just said, you're on social media, as you've mentioned. How does your presence online and, gathering the feedback that you get from the things that you put online, how does it transform your work?
There's a risk of, as in the previous question, perhaps things that your way of making a research, of a path of looking for something, is not what people appreciate. Sometimes you are tempted to produce things in order to satisfy your, let's say, followers. Some people say that my line is becoming more free, and it's losing straightness. Sometimes you feel, okay, they don't like it, but you cannot restrain yourself from your own way of being.
That sounds like when longtime fans go listen Bob Dylan. They don't, he's like been singing the same songs for so many times that now he's kind of changed the way he does, and it doesn't sound like the albums. So they kind of complain, like, I cannot understand what he's saying, but in some part, I think that's part of your work line, right? And you cannot be, it would be silly to get fixed into what, the style that you had at the beginning, or because this is like a continuous evolution. What is your relationship with technology and digital technologies. That I know that you, I don't know if you even had computers, probably not when you started studying architecture, but today everything's a bit different.
Let me say that my father died 22 years ago, and I think if he saw me today, he would be really surprised to see me managing computers and internet and social media, because I, in some sense, as we have talked about handwriting and hand sketching and the importance of taking time into things, it's like a contradiction. But it's you cannot be close to advances and progress, but you have to be aware what is a progress and what is not.
What piece of technology, like let's say a program, something you have on your phone, on your computer, can you think of a piece of software that makes your life a bit easier?
Well, the possibility of being in contact with someone at the other side of the world, just in this strict moment, for me, it's like a miracle.
It's crazy, yeah. And thinking more in creative terms, something that is maybe a tool that you use to, I don't know, for anything that has to do with your creative endeavors?
In that sense, I'm a bit old-fashioned. So I try to make things by hand, and once they are composed by hand, for example, I don't use digital drawing. In that sense, I'm a bit of old-fashioned.
Okay. One thing that I have here, or one question that I tend to ask all my guests, is that if you could send a message to the world, what would that be?
Don't run. Perhaps it's what I say. Don't run. Take the time to be aware where you are and where you're going. Don't just be pushed in some direction. Just to find like a gap, like a piece of time for yourself, and just try to locate where you are and where you're heading for. Just don't let the day by day pushing yourself in some direction that perhaps you are not interested in.
I have a quote here from you that says, "Do what satisfies you and what you think that could help others."
Yes, and helping others is. I think it's we are a social animal, so it's incredible when you perceive a smile directed at you by perhaps someone at a store or something. It can change your whole afternoon. So perhaps if we do it more frequently, it's a good way of acting, and it's a way also of making yourself more honest and more direct to the others, to yourself, of course.
In your process, this is kind of looping back to the previous topics. Is there anything that makes it easier for you now to do the work that you do as a creative, like the sketches or publishing books or writing things or connections that you didn't have before and that you wished you had found earlier?
I think things have to mature. You cannot. I think the more you study, the more you work. The quote by Picasso is very famous. Inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. So I don't think that the time you wasted is a wasted time. It's like an investment you have made.
what would you do if you didn't really need money, right? If we didn't need money to live, what would you do differently?
Time, yeah. Have time to do more things in a more relaxed way. Yeah, I think time is the important.
And in
factor.
contrast, what things do you do that maybe you wouldn't do if you had the money, right? Like, but what things are you doing because you need to obtain money in some way that you wouldn't like to do if you didn't need to?
Yeah, even the most rewarding activity like sketching or drawing, when you do it on purpose for others, when it's going to be published in a newspaper, you have to take into account who is going to see it. It's not always for yourself, a self document. It's something which is going to be for others. So yeah, you have to consider some restrictions in some sense. So it's not for yourself.
Are you comfortable with solitude and boredom?
Yes, I need it. For me, have some spaces of silence is very important to recalibrate your brain and to let the ideas settle. I need the others. For me, is being with my family and friends is really the essence of life. But without those spaces, I couldn't live.
Is there any time that you think about death?
Yes, very frequently. In fact, thinking about time, as we said, is about thinking of birth and death. So not only with people, but with history, with time. Yeah, and I think it's the great subject of literature and art.
How do you think thinking about death and life and birth and time inform what you do, not only creatively, but on your day-to-day?
Well, it gives the real importance about yourself and about what you do. So it's not really important at all. So if you see the tiny dot, we are in the middle of the universe, so it makes you feel more relaxed about what you do and what you are.
It makes the typo and the wiggly line like meaningless, right?
Yeah. So it's not something to be scared of. It's just put the things in precise terms.
What do you think that distracts you, that grabs you away from being able to maybe spend quality time with your family or spend quality time writing or doing what you like doing?
Social media is terrible. It's a very useful tool that has helped me reaching places I had never dreamt of. But when you use the same thing for work and for distraction, yeah, it's a really dangerous tool. I see it with my kids that have now, even though they have reached it in a very late age for what is common today, but I see now how they perceive things, they study, and the way it's hard for them to focus on tasks. It happens to me too, so I understand what is going on.
It does happen to me too. And what techniques or what things do you do to disconnect, right? To maybe claim those moments of solitude, of maybe boredom, or just time to yourself?
Walk. I like taking a stroll through the city. Just leaving yourself get lost with not a particular path. So perhaps if you tend to go always in the same direction by the same street, try a different street this time. And just look around and try to get what you see. Listen to conversations for complete people that you don't know at all. So it's a very good way for me for doing that.
Do you, you talked about looking at the city as a place where we can all coexist. And I'm curious, in your daily routine, how does or what role does the city play? And also a bit unrelated, but as a follow-up, what process do you follow for like note taking? Do you do any daily journaling, or do you take notes of your own experiences?
Yeah, for me, the city is still the best invention made by the human being. Today, city is perceived like a negative factor for humanity, full of dangers and bad things. I completely disagree with that approach. I think perhaps it's kind of urban settlement that has nothing to do with cities. Cities is a place where you interact with others in a non-planned way. We have lots of compartments, and when you go out in the street, you just blend with the others, and the unexpected might happen. So I like to have no plans in that sense. I like to go to shops, and I like talking to my grocer and to my to the bread. How do you say? What's the word?
Bakery.
The baker. Yeah, it's a very good way of keeping track of the real life. So listening to the things they talk about, it's very useful, and you receive back also a smile, which is we have to smile more, and we need more smiles received.
And the other question was, is there any routine that you have for note taking, maybe taking notes or journaling about your day, or as you said before, the sketching as a way to keep a record of your days?
Yeah, I at some point I made up some idea, which is hunting or fishing ideas. Hunting is you go with a plan to discover things. I prefer fishing, acting as a fisherman. You just throw the net and something will come up. So I think it's more the way I do things. Not to have a plan, but just let things come into you. So perhaps I don't have a really articulate way of organizing things.
And I think that the unstructured nature of that process, where you're not. I mean, some people don't work that way, right? Some people, apparently, from the outside, at least as we can see them, plan ahead for months or for weeks or something, and say like, okay, this week is going to be this post, this book for next year, this thing. But at least it doesn't work for me. I don't know. I cannot do that. So yeah, I really like the analogy of hunting versus fishing.
I am envious of those people that can plan. It's just I'm not capable of that.
Sometimes I think it's more the perception. Like some people might, I mean, of course, some people know how to plan and really well, but for other people might be just the perception from the outside. Like some people might perceive that you have a tight schedule every week and you're publishing, and it just gets to know a person to know that the process might not be what we imagined. Last question in this round would be, how do you define success?
Yeah, I consider myself as a very ambitious person, but some people consider me not ambitious at all, because my ambition is in the intellectual side. So I consider productive activities, learning and discovering things, being curious about things. So to have the chance of being curious and making research on things is for me the success. To have time to do that kind of activity.
All right. So before we start wrapping up, I know that you brought some sketchbooks, and I wanted to ask you for maybe urban sketchers or people who write, what are your tools? What are your, like, the brand of your pens, or what watercolor brush you use, or what sketchbook? What's your go-to gear for sketching today?
Again, my motto is borrowed from you. Keep it simple. Getting simple. The lighter you go, the better, because it's not like producing wonderful images, very complex. Just grabbing the reality and putting it in the paper. So for me, it's just sketchbook, a pen, and a portable watercolor set.
And could you, for maybe if there's any urban sketcher that's listening, what brands do you like? Like, I know that I use the Micron and like some Pentel brush. Which ones do you use?
Well, regarding the sketchbook, I like these little sketchbooks, very small ones by Italians. Also the like DIN A5 size. It's Hannemüller. It's very common for me using them. I like the touch and the feeling of the paper. Stillman Bern, also a brand I like, and not a very particular brand because it's more handmade. It's accordion concertina sketchbooks. For me, it's a very good way of narrating things and blending the little details with wider panoramas.
What about pens and brushes?
Yeah, for pens I use Micron pens, which is for me is very useful because they are permanent, so you can put the wash afterwards. And these Russian watercolor sets, White Knight, I like them. I think that they have an inevitable relation between quality and price, and they have very vivid colors, which I like a lot.
Yeah, and Sakura Micron pens have archival ink, so that means that they won't fade away with time. And do you write by hand as well?
For my articles, daily articles, I type. But when I am thinking, when I'm not producing something specific, just grabbing things and putting them on the paper before they vanish, I like handwriting. I'm making not only handwriting, but making schemes and notes. I even have one sketchbook by my bed, and perhaps I wake up at night and perhaps you come up with something you have dreamt and say, okay, I'm going to forget this if I not take it down right now. So yeah, I handwrite in those terms.
What is next for Luis Ruiz? What can we see next from you?
Well, now at this point, I am very passionate with teaching at the university. So I think it's like a new world opening with many different branches. The production of research articles about academic articles about perception of the city through sketching and drawing is a new path. I would also like to those 7 years of sketching, 7 years of writing, which are dispersed articles and texts perhaps putting them in a more comprehensive way, perhaps getting them together in a book with some structure.
Yeah, I actually am envious of the students that you have, because I studied at the same school, and it would have been awesome to have you as a teacher. And, we didn't talk about your thesis, but can you briefly comment on what it is, in case of people are interested?
Yeah, my thesis, which deals of the drawings made from my city, from the image of my city since the Middle Ages to when photography came up. It's the way of it's the investigation of how this image has evolved, but also how it has been perceived by people. We architects like a lot to study the plans and maps of the cities, and not so much the sketches, three-dimensional sketches, because they are very subjective. They are not objective, and they are not reliable because you cannot measure on them, but they provide really, really interesting information. And it's something historians are perhaps, because they don't sketch. When you sketch, you understand what other sketches did. You understand what decisions they made, where they cheated. But they cheated to tell the truth. It's another contradiction. But sometimes you have to make a bit of cheating to be honest. And it's something you, as a sketcher, will understand perfectly.
Yeah, you gotta deform reality to make it more real.
So it's like summoning the whole collection of drawings and putting them in context. It's what I did in my thesis.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Last thing before we wrap up, I will ask you if there's anything that you want to ask me.
Yeah, I would like to ask you how an architect like you has evolved to this kind of things this very interesting and enriching things you are doing that perhaps are not so related apparently to architecture. That would be my question for you.
A good one. So I began, actually something that is interesting is that even before I knew I was going to study architecture, I had already started tinkering with computers. So I got, in this house that we're recording here, behind there was one of our first desktop computers, and I would spend many, many hours with them. I remember I happened to buy like magazines with computers, and they brought even like a test software for editing images, like the processors of Photoshop or something like that. Let's say I got into computers before I got into architecture completely, and I started programming. There is an interesting turn there when I realized that by designing things on the computer and programming and putting things online, I think this was 2003 or 2002 or something, there was money that was coming into your bank, right? Like advertising money and money for people who wanted to sign up for things and all this sort of stuff. So I kind of got hooked by the internet even before growing up and studying. And this played into my advantage while I was in architecture, because I was really acquainted with the digital medium. So I was really quick at catching up AutoCAD and other programs and 3ds Max 2D renderings. And this persisted throughout my career. I put a lot of effort into architecture, but every opportunity I had, I would do some programming or some design or some 3D stuff that could complement the design projects that I was doing. And in fact, the first application that I put out there in the world was an iPhone app that had to do with bending moments. It was a really simple one. It's there. It's called Forces. It's still on the App Store. So this was really in 2012. It was like a lot later. But it also, people would pay for it. Some people would see that it was useful. Other people said it was crap. And, I was fine with that. But yeah, I got hooked. I continued programming, and it wasn't unless I went to a workshop where they introduced me to parametric design, that is kind of like using computation to design things for architecture and engineering, that I managed to merge those fields. Then I went to I mean, there was like some other places in between, but I ended up getting specialized at the Harvard ESD in Boston in this field, learn more programming, and then I decided that my experience being an architectural designer had kind of ended, and I was going to focus more in programming and all that stuff. So I turned into programming, and I also ended up doing a lot of, I was trying to optimize processes. So I got hooked by trying to optimize things inside of architecture, inside of how to do things for design, how to write, how to publish online. And this turned out into this that we're doing today. So podcasting, media, content, lecturing online to teach people and to learn, as you mentioned before. So learning myself. And yeah, so I really enjoy it. I hope that this more and more over my career is that the main director of my work and creative life. And I really enjoy it. You know, when I got into audio, I was starting to become, one of my teachers told me I was starting to become like an audio engineer, right? But so I'm trying to do all these things, but getting a bit detached from the production process and things like that. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, but it's I think it's really on spot, because I really don't like when people call me an architect. I think I am, we refer to this as being retired architects. You know, we were architects, but now we have a different point. But at the same time, I wouldn't change the fact of having studied architecture for anything else in the world. Because even though I didn't learn like full computer science or other disciplines, I think we learned things like marketing, or like in idea generation, idea execution, the ability to focus on something you want to get out the door. So yeah, I think it's really valuable. So even if you don't want to be an architect, it might make sense to study architecture to be a marketer, or like a businessman, or I don't know, many other things. I think this way. I don't know if that's true, but as you can see, I mean, in this room we have Luis, that is an architect who writes and teaches and sketches and does other things. I'm doing many things, and behind the camera we have Daniel Natoli, which was on the podcast before as well, and he's filming these things and doing a lot of creative projects. So I think, you know, it's I guess it happens in any field, but architecture is one of the ones, because of the crisis that we've had with construction and the difficulties on getting a job started. People are reinventing themselves, and they find themselves on the market with such a powerful tool that is going from concept to idea to execution to production to selling it to people in a way that might be understandable and appealing. So yeah, I don't know. I think that is what defines me as well. Trying to get things that are really hard in a way that is more digestible, and hoping to simplify them in a way. So thanks for your question.
Thanks to you.
And yeah, I want to wrap up this saying thank you to everyone who's been watching today. And if you stuck with us until the end, this was Luis Ruiz. It's been my pleasure to have you on the show. And I hope that we can talk in the future.
Honored to be here today with you. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.